and I was like dressed like a graduate. I had like a nice outfit on. And without an ounce of hesitation, me and whoever else lost jumped in that pool. It was cold. And I remember, like, now I was thinking about it, and I'm like, I could have just said, like, no. I was 25 years old, 26, 25 or 26. Like, I had all the faculties and abilities to just be like, I'm not doing that. Welcome to The Good Stuff, a podcast brought to you by The Good Word Co. This is your host, Caitlin Piggott. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to The Good Stuff, a podcast for anyone going through anything. This is your host, Caitlin Piggott. Today is going to be a very different episode, and I was a little hesitant to do it, and then for many reasons, one of which being like, this is different than my regular format. And then, you know what I remembered? This is my podcast, and I can do what I want. So that's what we're doing today. And it's for sure the most personal episode I've done. And yeah, so we'll see how that goes. But I try to use this podcast as like a way for my listeners to understand that what they're feeling about certain things, they're not the first person to feel that. And so I like to bring topics that are obviously relevant in my life, but I feel like I have something I can share, some sort of wisdom that I can give you all. Today is not really like that in the traditional sense, but yeah, today we're going to talk about Ben. And if you know who I'm talking about when I say that, just listen to the rest of this with your own judgment, because I don't want to make anyone sad at a time that they're not prepared to be sad. So if you've been listening, probably within the last 6 months or so, you've maybe heard me talk about him a couple times. I talked about him in my episode about grief. I also talked about him without saying what I was talking about in like my first episode of 2025. I think it's called Let's Talk About Support. And I hinted at something that had happened and in that episode. And then I opened up in a couple episodes over the summer about Ben because we were doing his celebrations of life, and I felt like enough time had passed for myself and his family to be able to kind of share some stories about him. For context, he's the oldest son of my family's very best friends. And so I grew up with him being basically my oldest brother. And he passed away the beginning of 2025. He actually passed away on January 13th, 2025, which when you're hearing this was yesterday, which is why this episode is about him. I have said many times in this podcast that I don't really have a plan for when I'm going to talk about something in a like very regimented way. I sort of let things come to me as my life unfolds and things happen and current events happen, and I just wait to be kind of inspired to talk about something. So the other day I got an email from a site. When he passed away, his family gave the option for people to donate trees in his honor, plant a tree in his honor. And so I had done that, and I got an email from that organization saying, hey, with very good intention. They were like, we know that this is anniversary is coming up. Like, we're thinking of you and whatever. And it hit me. I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, that is like next week. And I don't know. I think there's a complicated relationship with celebrating is the wrong word, but honoring, recognizing the day someone passes. I'm not going to give an opinion on either way, what you do, what you don't do. It is definitely, for me, like I'm a dates person. I am really good at remembering people's birthdays. Like I remember the birthday of people who I was in like grade school with, who I haven't spoken to in 15 years, but just, I don't know. So anyway, all that to say, I'm a dates person. And so I acknowledge it. And I don't know how I'm obviously recording this before January 13th. since you're listening to it on January 14th. And so I don't know how I'll feel on that day or what I'll do or what I won't do. It just is what it is. I feel like anybody who's lost someone, everyone handles those days differently. And I'm not going to give advice or pass judgment on what you do. But anyway, I got that email and I was like, oh yeah, wow, that's coming up. That's happening. And I have been very intentionally private. I say a lot on this podcast too, like, that's not for the internet. And I was very intentional about not talking about Ben until I felt like it was appropriate and in context that it was appropriate. And I'm going to continue to do that. This is not going to be a very long episode, I don't think, because of that. But knowing him, also speaking to his family, I felt like this would be a way, hopefully with goodness in it, to acknowledge him, acknowledge this time, give me an opportunity to share with the things I have, some things about him that are really amazing and things that I do feel like my audience would benefit from hearing. Obviously, there's thousands of stories and memories that are not for the internet, but I think there's some principles and things about him that are really wonderful and lots of people could benefit from hearing. So that's what we're going to talk about today, or rather who we're going to talk about today. Ben passed a little bit before, or his birthday's in November. So he was 39 years old when he passed. Much too young. He was diagnosed with cancer 4-ish years before that. 4.5 years before that. 3.5 years before that. Let me do quick math. I guess 3.5 years before that. Summer of 2021. Yeah. And here's another complicated thing. When someone is diagnosed with any sort of disease that is really intense and could be terminal, when people are like, which Ben did live longer than what they initially maybe thought. But I feel like icky saying that. I don't even like saying those kinds of things because it feels like, I don't know. Then there's some people who the timeline does match up and it feels like you're on this like ticking clock. I don't like it. But anyway, Ben lived very vibrantly for about 3.5 years with and without cancer, coming through having a long time where he was in remission. Anyway, I'm not going to get into his medical history, but he passed away, again, beginning of 2025. And those of us who loved him, his family, organized 2 celebrations throughout the summer to honor him and to do different things that he had wanted at those celebrations. That we all grew up in California, and his family lives in Montana. And so that's where the 2 things were, so that all the people from his life could come. And they were really special days, both of them, for different reasons, in different ways. It was comforting I don't want to try supersede his blood relatives, but as close as you can be to a family, that's how close we are to these people. So it was really comforting as someone who really loves that family and is very connected to them and very close to them, to see the kinds of people who came. Obviously, there was people from all these stages of our lives that it was just, even people that only had the opportunity to know Ben for the last 10 years when they moved, and to see the impact he had on them was the same as someone who has known him since he was 5. Really spoke to the kind of person that he was and continues to be. And I think that is worth noting too. And in times like that, grief is so complicated. I have learned that many times, but I think with something like this, when someone who I compare it to like my grandma and my grandparents who have passed away, that they were old, and that was sad and I miss them. However, growing up as a child, your brain like can comprehend that a lot easier than a perfectly healthy 30 at the time, 35-year-old man getting really sick and passing away at 39. That's like not how it's supposed to happen. And it just in our, in your human understanding, I actually said that. I spoke during one of the services. I wasn't really planning on it, but I ended up just getting up and saying a few things. And that was like part of what I said in that message was I was like, this makes no sense. I can't understand this. Like our brains cannot comprehend this. I'm someone who believes in God. And so that one day we will understand. But right now with all the understanding we all have, it's really confusing and frustrating still. And I think that that's okay. I think it's okay to feel those things, I also think that's an interesting thing in grief. Like, and I said this in my grief episode, right? When you miss someone and the feelings you have after they're gone is just you grieve because you loved them and you loved them. So you grieve them and it's all one emotion just showing up in different ways. But I also think it's okay to feel those moments of frustration and confusion when you lose someone in a way like this or an accident, or there's so many things where you're like, why did that have to happen? And we just can't understand it with the knowledge and brain power that we are given as humans. And so, anyway, that was like part of my message was just how weird and confusing this was. Not weird is the wrong word, but just how confusing and out of order this felt. As I said, he was the oldest of that family, but also the oldest, and like he was older than my oldest brother too. And we operated as such a unit. He went to high school first. He went to college first. He kind of like paved the way for all of us. We all went to the same high school, at least not the same colleges, but some of us, but not all of us. And it felt like, because I'm going to try not to cry. But it felt like because like he had done that already, like, anyway, I got to high school many years. Me and his youngest brother are the same age. She's my very best friend. And we, even though Ben had, and my oldest, all of our siblings, well, we had one. We were there with one of John's brothers. Shout out William. I lied. Even though like Ben had been in high school however many years before us, a lot. Sorry. Like, his first day of freshman year was 10 years before ours, because he's 9 or 10 years older than us. But like even that, like even in moments like that, he had left his mark. All of our siblings had too, but he had gone first and kind of made sure like everything was good. And he did that with all things. Like, again, even going to college, he just did it first because he was oldest. But something about that made it like a less difficult transition. At least that's how I felt as the youngest, as the caboose. His youngest brother and I literally are the same age, but same grade. He is older by like 6 months. But anyway, sorry, I'm making jokes because I'm uncomfortable, but that's just the kind of person he was. And I think if you're a youngest sibling or you have like older cousins or whatever, what that feeling is like. It's just, I think we benefit a lot from that, or I felt like I've benefited from that. Same thing with my older brothers, or just people like, it's just like, okay, the situation is like safe. It's like the person, like Ben would be the person who goes like all clear because he like has scoped it out already. Right. And so I was saying at that service, I'm like, I appreciate you really looking out for us and doing all things first. Just a lot of complicated emotions. Those are some of the ones I've been feeling over the last year. And yeah, so that's where I sit with that. And although this is my podcast and I can talk about myself, I'm getting uncomfortable, obviously. So I want to shift gears a little bit and share parts of him that I think will benefit those of you watching and listening, and sort of take some lessons from how he lived his life and use them as inspiration for things that either you can recognize in yourself, you can aim for to do, or just things that can, I don't know, provide you some sort of peace. Also, with like how I introduced this episode, if you are someone who has been through something similar, I do hope that you can understand that even someone who, you know, I tried to pull myself together as best I could for this podcast. And I think if you've watched more episodes of mine, you know, I'm typically a little more clear with my thoughts and words and what I have to say. And even though it's been a year, this is still how confusing and how confused and like jumbled I feel about it. So, and I hope that's okay. I think that's okay. I think grief is grief until you see that person again. You feel these kinds of things. I still feel these kinds of things even with my grandparents who have passed away. That's still sad, still confusing. You still wonder why like that, why this way, like all those things. It's just different. That doesn't mean I loved them less than I love Ben, but it's different. And I think that's okay too. I think it's okay to recognize that there's different kinds of grief because there's different kinds of loss. And as I was prepping this podcast, I was reminded of something in my house that also made me feel like kind of good and not excited to talk about this. Obviously, I'm not excited to talk about a sad thing, but excited to get to share part of Ben with you guys. I have a sticky note up in my, what functions as like my guest room, extra room, whatever. It's where my walking pad is. And I look at this cork board and there's a sticky note on there because it's not sticky anymore, because this is a sticky note that's like, at this point, 5.5 years old. No. Yeah, it's 2026. Yeah, about 5.5 years old. And it's from around the time that Ben got diagnosed. I was listening to this podcast and there was an author on, and his whole, like, I don't know if it was the title of his book or just the shtick that he was promoting at the time, was this idea of like crazy faith. And it was like how, you know, you can have what appears to be like a crazy or like big hope in something that could happen, obviously in a religious sense. And we, again, this was like early days. It was a very confusing time. And I wrote down on this sticky note, I'm going to read off my computer because I didn't want to mess up any words, but I wrote, Ben will find healing and be able to share his story like nobody else has before. And then I put crazy faith at the bottom because at that point, the diagnosis was scary. And I was just like, I think people who have experienced something similar to that, there's an immediate like rejection of what doctors are saying where you're just like, no. I was like, no, I do not. Nope, you're wrong. This isn't happening. No. And so I think this was kind of a way for me to be like, okay, like, you know, he's going to be the 0.5% or the 1, whatever the percentage was. And like, of course he's going to be okay because it's Ben, right? I think everyone feels that way about their loved one. And I will say Ben just was one of those people. He was larger than life. He did things, and I'll give you some examples that you just knew, like, he just had superpowers. So I was like, nope, thank you for your time, but that's not how this is going to go. And so I think, again, kind of part of my way of doing that was in the sticky note. And I remember sitting there being like, because the man on the podcast was saying like, be really intentional with like what you're saying. And so when I wrote that sticky note, I had this vision. Ben was kind of involved. He had been involved in politics and was just that kind of guy. Good politician, though. He would have been a great politician. He was a great politician. And I just like pictured him on this stage telling the story and like giving these, I don't know, accounts of what had happened to him and changing the world. And that's what I pictured when I wrote that. I remember this. And when I was last night, I was on my walking pad prepping notes for this. And I was like, here's a way that his story could be told like never before. Not that I'm comparing myself to him, not that I'm even comparing this platform to him. It's obviously not the same and it's not as big, but it is a way like no one has shared their story before. And I'm like, got it. There's something I can do. There's some way that I can feel like I'm being helpful. And which is my core need as an Enneagram 2. And so anyway, I just thought that was like an interesting little reminder. And I've kept that up because I don't know. I obviously feel like his story doesn't have to be over. So I'm keeping it up. And anyway, that was just a fun little moment that happened last night. And so, yeah, we're going to get into some more stories and just like parts of him now. And I want to share these with you guys because one, some of you who are listening know him and this might bring you comfort at a time that's tricky. And two, it might remind you of someone like him. And like I said, it might inspire you to do some things differently or the same. So anyway, let's get into it. I'm going to start by telling, I have 4 stories I'm going to tell. And that all kind of give you an idea of who Ben is and was. So the first one was my 3rd birthday. And now I remember this and I'm sure differently than like I'm going to tell the story because we've shared the story so many times my whole life, not just in the last, 4 or 5 years, but just in my whole life. It's like a very classic story for our families because it really articulates Ben's nature. So I think it was my 3rd birthday, which means he would have been like 11 or 12. Our birthdays are like, whatever, 11 or 12. And I got a Barbie Jeep. And him and my brother, this is how I remember it. So if I was wrong, whatever. But he and my brothers went outside to like set it up for me or whatever. And then he comes in the doors. They like open the door. It's time for my big present. And he like opens the doors and he was carrying it. Him and my brothers, I'm sure too, were like carrying it in the house. And my mom was like, the pride on their faces was just so precious because they had, screwed the screws or whatever they had done to make sure that it was ready. And they felt like so, mature and old for having some sort of responsibility. My oldest brother would have been he's a year younger than Ben. So 10 or 11. And then my middle brother so this is like a 11, 10, and 8-year-old doing this. So I'm sure it was adorable. But Ben also, especially for an 11-year-old, he was like big, just like tall and they're just whatever. It's not really relevant. But my mom and our moms always say like it was just such a fun memory. They were, and then we were out front and then there's like this picture of me and his youngest brother. Very classic photo of us. I'm driving the Barbie Jeep. He looks terrified, which is like probably valid. And I like remember that. I remember the boys coming in. I remember driving it around. But now I look back with a different lens of like how sweet it was. A lot of 10 and 11-year-olds could have been annoyed that they were even at a 3rd birthday. And I was a pestery little sister too. I think I've said this on the podcast before. Like I just wanted to do whatever my brothers were doing. And there's a 5 and 10-year age gap with them. And then a 8 or 9-year age gap to Ben. And like, I'm sure that was so annoying. I was always around. I couldn't do what they were doing. Like a 3-4-year-old cannot do what a 12-year-old can do. But nonetheless, they were nice to me most of the time. Most of the time. Anyway, so that's like just a sweet story. Gives you some. There's also this photo from my birthday. I'll see if I can find it. That same birthday, I got a Barbie cake. There was really a theme going on here. And if you lived through any part of the 90s, you either had this cake or you were at a birthday where someone had this cake, or it was a Barbie. And then her dress was like the cake. Honestly, sick. And it's like me, and for some reason, Ben was behind me. I don't know, he was trying to blow out my candle or something, maybe. I'm not sure, but it's like this photo of like the cake, me, and Ben. I'll see if I can find it. Anyway, that's like my first sweet story. Again, just kind of giving you an insight into how he operated. The next one comes many years later. Like I said, like there's obviously countless memories that I just want to keep for myself and our families. But this was many years later. And this was actually probably a month before his event happened that led to the diagnosis. So their family has always had like a paddle tennis court, or had a paddle tennis court at their house in California. And so we were playing that. That was like what you did at family gatherings. It was William's like master's graduation. Some sort of higher education, higher than college. I don't know. William's done a lot of cool school things. So one of those. I think it was his master's. Yikes. His master's graduation party. And we had done all the things, and we were playing like, that was like kind of what you did. We like played paddle tennis, and we were, I don't know, drinking Coors Light or something. And Ben had decided losers jumped in the pool. And I lost. Me and whoever was on my team lost. And I was like dressed like a graduate. I had like a nice outfit on. And without an ounce of hesitation, me and whoever else lost jumped in that pool. It was cold. And I remember like now I was thinking about it. I'm like, I could have just said like, no. I was 25 years old, 26, 25 or 26. Like I had all the faculties and abilities to just be like, I'm not doing that. But you just did what he said, and not in he didn't abuse that. It just like, I mean, obviously he was also just the oldest. So anyone who's has any sort of sibling, whether you are the oldest or the youngest or in the middle, like you kind of just listen to the oldest one. And that's just always something he had, part of who he was. And yeah, I remember I had to go borrow clothes. I was obviously soaking wet. There's actually like so many great photos from that night. But I'm in sweats in all of them because it was post loss. Yeah, we all learned a lot of lessons on those paddle tennis courts. My brother actually told a funny story at one of Ben's services about an experience with him there as well. We did a lot of life out there, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of just, yeah, good times. But I just thought that was funny. It was like, wow, I think he was just one of those people you just would have done whatever he said. Like that he was the kid that parents probably worried about. Like if Ben told you to jump off a bridge, would you? And like they should have, not that he would have done that, but he just had that like authority, and you just followed his lead. Like I was talking about earlier, his idea was probably the best, but yeah, pretty crazy that still as like whole grown adults, that's how we were punishing ourselves at like a nice function. I was in like a dress, I think. Oh, it's a reason to smile and laugh now, so that's good. Okay, the next story is not really an event, but just something about him. So, as I mentioned, he was initially diagnosed in the summer of 2021, I think. Yeah, 2021. And he passed the beginning of 2025. So that's like 3.5 years of treatments, things, all sorts of stuff. And a couple of times I was just around when something was happening or there was an appointment or whatever. And I got a glimpse of the Excel document that he was keeping because he decided, okay, this is what I'm going through. I want to obviously do everything he felt comfortable doing, but I want this to be able to help someone else. I didn't want them to be able to see. He got really serious about like his diet, everything you could imagine, and kept, I mean, when I say detailed and copious, I mean even more detailed and copious than you could imagine. Again, because he wanted to be a resource, and just like the ability to think of that when you are facing such a scary thing, to be like, I'm going to keep these notes, yes, for my own records, know how this thing makes me feel, or this doesn't make me, like, if I feel better or worse, or just to keep track of what he was doing, but also as a resource for somebody else there's no better way to describe him. So anyway, and then the last story actually happened at one of the services. We were in Montana, and we were standing by the river, and that was like kind of where part of the events were occurring, was down at the river. Ben loved to fish. The river was a very special place to him, and particularly like the spot that we were all at. It was just like one of his favorite places in the whole world. And so we were there to have him close to us during that day. And I was reminded of this because the other day I was looking for someone's contact in my phone, and I searched a name, and I saw this contact that came up with that name and Ben's friend. And I was reminded of this story. And so, yeah, we were standing at the river, and, you know, you get to just kind of talking to people at events. It's like a wedding. Like, how do you know so-and-so person, right? So you're kind of exchanging that. Like I said, I had spoken earlier that day, so some people knew who I was because I had said, like, either I just already knew them because we live so closely with them, or I had just announced I said, I'm Katie, and here's Bo, or whatever. I'm so-and-so, and here's my relation. And so I don't remember how this conversation started with this particular guy, but we got to sharing, and we live in the same city, and we were explaining how, like, exchanging stories, and, you know, we were talking about how when he had met Ben and how he knew him, and obviously I was sharing mine, and Ben had actually done some treatment here, so we were exchanging stories about like that week he was here and when we had spent time with him, whatever. And he is Ben's peer, so, or a little bit older maybe, so, you know, 8 to 10 years older than I am. And even though I'm 30, there's still, I think, part of my nature is just I'm a little sister. So, and I'm a little sister of brothers, and so I really respond well to, like, I don't know, guys who just seem like nice and looking out for me, whatever. And this guy, he said, well, I'm going to try to not get sad again, but he was just like, he gave me his number, and he said, like, I just want you to have this if you ever need anything, like if you ever need anything, call me. And like, I'd never met that person before, but I like in seeing that in the moment, it was just very sweet. And I said, oh, thank you so much. Cause he lives like 20 minutes away, and, you know, he's like, if you ever need anything or want to, you know, I don't feel like I have to say this, but he's married and got kids and stuff. It's not like weird like that, but, it felt very like, oh my God, it just like felt like something Ben would have done, which is not a surprise because of course he surrounded himself with really great people like that. But in the moment, and now like reflecting on it and just like seeing that the other day, I was like, oh yeah, like I forgot I had that person's information. And it reminded me, and I hope anyone who is listening who has lost someone, who this might not be the exact situation, but like through the people that you like know through them, or with so many things, like you can just see little moments where you're like, they're like, not that they're still here, because they're not still here, but you can still like feel them in people and things and moments. And that was something I was like, just, I don't know, felt good to still know that like it just was a really nice thing for that person to do, and it made me feel comforted. I also just know like that person did that because he saw that, you know, obviously Ben was someone who was important to mine and my family's life. And so I'm sure because, you know, he's obviously a nice person, was like, probably felt inclined to do that. I'm sure he felt inclined to do that for Ben, which speaks to the person Ben was and the person that the kind of person that guy is, because he did not have to do that. Like, he could have just said, oh, like, you know, great to meet you. He didn't have to go the extra mile to be like, I think we live in the same place, and make that connection and to like do that. And he probably has no idea that I didn't know that this had this impact on me till I started talking about it right now. I didn't know this would make me so emotional. Like, what a random part of what I have written down here to have this impact on me. But anyway, maybe take that as a lesson. Like, you really don't know. This is beyond Ben. Like, you really don't know what little action and could have what kind of impact that could have on someone's life, conscious or not. I think I'm now consciously recognizing that meant a lot to me, because it reminds me that I have like a little bit of that protection really close, which is cool. Okay, we're gonna stop crying now. Wow, not an internet crier. Not even a big non-internet crier. That doesn't happen often. Okay. Anyway, I don't even know if I told that story fully, but yeah, it was just a really cool moment at the river that has obviously made an impact on me, and showed me the kind of people that he kept in all times of his life. The people, this was his best friend, and like that is really reaffirming. That action was very much something he would have done. So again, it's not surprising that his best friend did it too. And it is really special. Okay, moving on. I mentioned that there was 2 celebrations, and I'm really glad that I was able to be at both, because they were a little different. And again, because one was more like people he's known for the last like 5 to 10 years versus people that we grew up with. Obviously, the content of the stories was different, because you had people talking about like something he had done as a 30-year-old or something he had done as a 13-year-old. And you do different things when you're 13 and 30. But the core, like you could tell that he's been the kind of person he is for a very long time. And it was cool to see that, and cool to share some of those stories and hear them and reflect with people about them and see, you know, and it's interesting to go to a funeral of someone that young, because it's just a weird mix of people. Not weird as in bad, just like an atypical group, because his parents were there, his parents' friends were there, his aunts and uncles were there. All these people that, you know, my grandparents' parents and aunts and uncles weren't at their funerals because the things happened in the normal way that we're all used to and comfortable with. So it was interesting in that sense, but also, you know, you could see there were some people who showed up, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but I was just like, oh, that's I didn't expect to see that person here. And then they started talking and sharing these stories, and you realize like, oh, I guess in my own selfish brain, I didn't realize that either the two of you were that close, or sometimes it was just like they were sharing what an impact he had and they felt inclined to come. And that was cool too, because it's not like he was trying to do that. This was more people like at the service of where we grew up. So I'm like, wow, not why are you here? It's so nice to see you, but like, this is random. But then they went on to share just like their reason for being there. And I thought it was really cool, because Ben also didn't do a lot of things for fanfare. I don't remember what number I said in my last episode when I talked about lessons I learned this year, but one of them was just to do the right things. It's the right thing. And that's totally how Ben was. He just did the nice and right and kind thing and didn't really talk about it there. I learned so much. Just as someone I had known every single day of my life until January 13th, 2025. Obviously, I still know him, but I had never known a day without him because our families have been friends that long. And I'm like, and I didn't know that, and I didn't know that, and I didn't know that. And I don't know, that was an interesting thing to like see, and you really never know what kind of impact you're having on someone and how far that can go. So yeah. Okay. The last thing I'm going to close with are some of the things that Ben taught me, or like things I see in myself that I'm like, oh, that was probably kind of a little bit inspired by him, or just something he would probably be proud of me for, or whatever he would appreciate about me, or did appreciate about me. Does so hard. Tenses are really tricky. I found myself struggling with that a lot over the last year, uniquely with the loss of Ben, different than my two grandmas and my grandpa, who it's not hard for me to say was or did or had. But I found that difficult with this. Does anyone else have that? Anyway, the first one is to be strong in all you do. So be strong and bold in everything you go after, professionally, personally. Just be a strong force. The second one is to mean what you say, to not let something leave your mouth and be heard by the world, well, or whatever your version of the world is, in that moment, unless you mean it. And then stand by it. You know, I think a lot of the stories I told, or at least particularly that one, like at the river, I think that, like, I believed his friend, and he was like, you call me if you need something, because that's like how Ben was and what he would have said. And I do believe that. And I'm glad that I came across that number, because I might need it one day. And I'm grateful to remember that I have that. And that's a lesson for all of us. Like, don't say something unless you mean it, and understand that your words are very impactful and important, even in moments that might feel not significant. And then the last one is to find something to anchor your life to. Ben was very faithful, very, very faithful, especially towards, in his journey with his diagnosis. And it inspired all of us to kind of get a little bit more faithful. And whatever it is, I'm not here to tell you what you should anchor your life to, but I think it's important to have some sort of understanding that there's something else going on, something bigger than what all of us are just doing, every single day. That there is a bigger like purpose and meaning and significance to all of our lives. And again, I'm not going to tell you what to align that with, or if it's God, even what religion to follow to see him as clear as you would like to see him. But I think that is a really cool and important lesson for all of us, to just have something that anchors you, because you don't know when you're going to need it. And yeah, it keeps you where you need to be. So those are the things that he taught me, and how I try to live to be more like him. Because I think that's an interesting and cool way to like honor people too, is to just keep parts of them as part of who you are. So yeah, that's where we're at. I don't really have a lot else to say. Obviously, you literally saw or heard parts of where this is. I haven't cried about this in a long time, so that was interesting. I don't cry, like I said, about many things. I'm just not a crier. I will tear up at a like tender video on the like internet, but actual like cry, not often. I don't know. That's probably, I don't know if that's good, bad, whatever. It just is who I am. So yeah, that's my episode about Ben. That did feel good to get out. I hope that all of you learned something from this. I hope you have some takeaway. I don't have the clarity of mind to wrap it all up like I normally do to give you the reminders of what those things were. But if you've made it this far, I'm sure that you have taken something away from this, and that makes me happy. And I hope that makes Ben happy too. So thank you so much for listening to another episode of The Good Stuff, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Good Stuff. Your host is me, Caitlin Piggott. Follow The Good Word on Instagram at the.good.word.co. And follow The Good Stuff podcast at the.good.stuff.podcast. To reach out about this podcast, email contact@thegoodwordonline.com. Graphic design work was done by Sugar Pine Design. The photo on my cover art was taken by Bella Claire Photography. And the intro and outro audio was done by David Nolf.